First and foremost, State Senator Blake Tillery, appreciate you making the time, hanging out with us on the Georgia Vote. Thank you for coming here today.
Well, thank you, Zach, for the opportunity.
Let's start with the big question. You made a big announcement. You are now running for Lieutenant Governor. Big race. What makes you think you're the right man for the job?
Well, I think I've earned this position. So for many, many years now, I've been chairing the budget for the past 7 years. I understand state government. I think I come at it from a unique perspective. As a father of two, a foster father of two more, me and Ashley Nicole want our kids to be raised on the same faith in God and Georgia values that we were raised on. I think that's what most Georgians want.
Are you mentioned Georgia values, your faith. In your press release announcing your candidacy here, you talked about, and I want to make sure I get this exactly right, but you said, I think here, this is a quote of yours, you said, "I grew up in a time when we knew what a woman was, merit mattered, and freedom was sacred." Are you worried those things are no longer the case?
I think that we've seen those challenged over the past half decade. I think we're seeing now with President Trump, the new Republican administration, that you're seeing a pushback against that. For a long time, I know conservatives felt that saying what they saw was challenged, whether it was that a man was a man and a woman was a woman, whether it was that boys shouldn't be in girls' locker rooms, whether it was any of those variety of issues that now seem to be woke and DEI. Those seem to be challenging for conservatives to be able to answer for. That's not what we feel now the past at least 18, 24 months.
I want to talk about some brass tacks issues, budget issues, affordability issues. As you know as well as I do, that's something that is always front of mind for Georgia voters. But you do bring up, and we're talking about the ideological component of things as well. So I want to linger here for a moment, if you are willing to, because I think it's worth sitting here for a second. You touted in your campaign launch that you passed legislation to ban the use of tax dollars for transgender surgeries. You mentioned kind of knowing, in your words, saying knowing who a man is and who a woman is. Transgender rights, transgender access, transgender people have been at the center of the political conversation in our state for some time now. How many transgender kids are playing high school and college sports in Georgia?
Right. Well, I don't think it's a question about how many. It's a question about whether or not we think that that viewpoint is appropriate to push down the throats of children. And I know, at least in the Georgia that I was raised in, I think that conservative values, folks understanding right from wrong, that a boy is a boy, that a girl is a girl, to be able to say that is not necessarily, should not be controversial. And for many, many years, I think conservatives felt that the national push was that if they said what they saw in front of their faces, that they were somehow the minority. To say that the king was not wearing any clothes, the emperor wasn't wearing any clothes, was somehow controversial or put them in the minority. I don't feel that folks feel that way anymore because folks have finally stood up.
What would you say perhaps to a parent of a young person who is transgender, they're struggling and they hear conversations like this and maybe they feel like their kid's being singled out by somebody who's pretty powerful?
First of all, I don't know that I'm very powerful, but I appreciate that comment, Zach. I do think, though, that I side with the majority of folks who are just trying to use common sense in these things. They're saying, hey, listen, the values that I was raised on, that I grew up with, don't change just because of the political winds. I'm not a politician that has to wet their finger and put it up in the wind to figure out what's right and what's wrong. I think that probably differentiates me from my opponents as well.
And I'm glad you bring that up because there is a big field of Republicans running for the job that you're running for as well. I want to ask you one last question on this topic, though. A lot of the conversation about trans kids focuses on kids, sports, high school sports, middle school sports, locker rooms, college athletics. But I do want to make sure we broaden it out a bit so we have an answer from you on the record here. Do you support the rights of transgender people as adults?
Let's back up. I think what you're doing is conflating two issues here. My position has been state taxpayer dollars should not be used to pay for transgender surgeries. And I still, regardless of if they're adults or children, do not think that state taxpayer dollars should go to that. If people want to use their own individual dollars for whatever surgeries they want to seek, that's fine. But if I, with private health insurance, or you with private health insurance, can't get your private health insurer to cover a procedure, why should the state have to cover that same procedure with taxpayer dollars? Especially when that person who's seeking a transgender surgery, we find them in our correction system.
And I'm glad you said that. I don't think I'm conflating, but that's why we always ask these questions,
Yeah.
because we want to tease it out. It's a complicated time in Georgia politics and American politics. So this is why we have these conversations. I appreciate you kind of getting into the details with us here. Let's shift gears, though, to one thing we were just mentioning here. You alluded to it. I brought it up as well. Big field of candidates running for lieutenant governor. There are 3 Republican state senators running for lieutenant governor and a Republican state representative. And there's a Democratic state senator running for lieutenant governor as well. You've got 4 state senators running for lieutenant governor, and you'll have to legislate in the upcoming session, too. How do you make that work?
Well, I think that's the sign of a healthy democracy. People are going to get to choose from a variety of ideas. They're not going to have a 1 or 2, 0 or 1 choice. There's going to be a plethora of ideas to choose from.
What makes you stand out from your opponents?
I've risen to a position that's powerful in the legislature, the appropriations chair. Clearly a top 10 position. Arguably on the week of budget week, it's a top 5 position. But even though I've been able to rise to that position through the respect and admiration, I guess, of my colleagues, none of them are ever going to accuse me of being a mouthpiece for the establishment.
When you say mouthpiece of the establishment, that's a loaded phrase there. What are you referring to?
So the Republican Party's not always right. And there have been times, let me give you an example. This year in the legislative session, we dealt with the issue of debanking. It's a sort of nuanced issue. And what it actually talks about is banks have tried to silence voices at times by closing accounts of entities or individuals who they disagree with. Maybe they disagree with their speech, maybe they disagree with what that company does. In instances here in Georgia, those companies made firearms. We saw a Georgia firearm manufacturer get debanked, had their bank accounts closed twice, not once, but twice.
What manufacturer was that?
It was Daniel Defense. They're a manufacturer down in Savannah. We also saw folks down in southwest Georgia who simply went to a political rally, then had their bank cards cut off. So I introduced a bill that said, hey, that's not right. These people were doing things that were otherwise constitutionally protected. They shouldn't have their bank accounts closed because they were doing something that was otherwise legal under the Constitution. And when I did that, the opposition to that was strong. The establishment was strong. The bank lobbies came out of everywhere. The Democrats universally opposed it. Heck, some of my opponents in this race opposed it. I'm going to stand for free speech and for the little guy every single time. I think that's a differentiator between me and my opponents.
I know that the issue of debanking has been a real focal point of yours. It's still not Georgia law, but you've been working on it for some time now. I do want to make sure we kind of include all perspectives here. A recent AP story had this line, and I want to make sure you have a chance to respond to it. The Associated Press noted that banks in these conversations, they usually say that they close accounts or deny loans because the person or business is deemed too risky, and that banks and the banking industry has long argued they have the right to choose who they go into business with as long as it doesn't violate laws like the Equal Credit Opportunity Act. That's the AP's synopsis of this. What's your response?
My response would be if a bank's closing someone's account because their credit is risky, that's one thing. But if they have an established banking relationship and the only reason that they've now closed the account is because the person's engaged with something that doesn't fit into a woke idea, that is debanking. And remember, the bill I proposed, Senate Bill 57, didn't deal just with banking. The lobbyists have turned that the debanking bill. It said you couldn't use or lose, rather, any essential service. So banking, internet, power, water, sewer. Georgia Power had no problem with that bill because they don't cut people off because of their speech. The water companies had no problem with that bill. They're not cutting people off with their speech. Neither did the internet companies. The only groups that had a problem with it were the banks. And I wasn't, the smartest kid at the University of Georgia, but I've realized that when you find one entity that has a problem with it and the other entities don't, usually your problem is with the entity that's squealing.
How widespread of an issue is this in your view?
Well, we know it's happened in Georgia at least 3 times, right? It happened to a Georgia gun manufacturer twice. You can't get legislation passed that says you can't make guns, so what do? You make it where they can't have credit to make them instead.
And not to minimize that in any way, and
Right.
I don't want to cut you off, but just to be clear, if we're talking about the average bank's number of customers in our state, it's certainly in the thousands, tens of thousands, probably hundreds of thousands for large banking groups. You're talking about 2 or 3 examples. Is this that widespread of an issue?
Well, you tell me, because once we start limiting anybody's constitutional right, would that not be a problem? If we say, hey, you don't get due process under the law, but we're only going to deny due process to 3 people this year under the law, is that a problem? I argue that it is. And we also weren't going after small community banks with that bill. As it turns out, we don't see the problem of debanking with our smaller community banks. So there was a threshold that was set into the bill. I believe it was $5 billion of assets. If you were a bank below $5 billion, this wasn't even going to apply to you because you're usually only seeing it at the larger end.
Why do you think the bill hasn't become law yet?
Didn't pass the General Assembly.
Why not?
I think that the establishment opposed the bill, that the bank lobby is strong, and when you're fighting for the little guy, sometimes it takes a couple of years to bring enough attention to the issue so that it will pass.
I always ask a candidate in these interviews this question. We've covered a lot of topics, but I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, because you're the candidate and I certainly am not, but there are always lots of issues that motivate somebody to get into a race like this, but most folks have one core driving idea or ideal or topic that really gets them to the point where they say, I'm all in here. So I want to ask this to you. What is the biggest issue facing Georgia right now?
I think it is affordability. And that's why I'm working so hard to eliminate Georgia's income tax. Families are feeling the pinch at the pump. They're feeling the pinch at the grocery store. We've been doing things in the budget to help the pinch they feel with childcare if they're a working family. And if we can eliminate Georgia's income tax, we can immediately supply those Georgia families with a slightly larger than 5% raise overnight. So why is that something we're not looking at doing? Other states around us are doing it. If they're doing it, we should be looking at doing it too.
I'm glad you bring that up. I want to make sure I ask you this question directly because you have promised to eliminate the state income tax. There is work being done now. I know there's a Senate study committee happening that you are leading.
Correct.
So you have a pretty close eye on this. As you know, and I say this because, in case our viewers might not, but as you know, Georgia must pass every year a balanced budget. If you get rid of the state income tax, how do you balance the budget?
Yeah, Georgia's income tax makes up roughly $16.2 billion of Georgia income, roughly 40 to 50% of our total state revenues. But you've seen that other states around us have been able to eliminate their state income tax. Florida and Tennessee have long been without a state income tax. North Carolina and South Carolina are rapidly approaching zero. And this isn't just a red state issue. Remember, Washington and New Hampshire also have zero income tax. So it's not a red-blue issue. It's not a Republican-conservative issue. It's really an affordability issue. And we owe our citizens the responsibility of a government to try to return as much money to them as we can, or just not take it in the first place.
Specifically, though, how do you do that?
So I think there's many things that can be done to do this. You've got 9 states that have already done it. So again, we've got a cafe of items to choose from. It's not going to be, you don't have to pick one or the other. The mechanics, I do think, are up for debate. I know they're up for debate, and that's why Lieutenant Governor Jones has appointed this committee and thankfully appointed me the chair to do so.
You talk about a cafe of items. Let's go to that cafe. What are the ones that are standing out to you as options to make this math work?
Yeah, well, let's look at what other states have done. Folks immediately look at Florida. They say, hey, Florida did this because of tourism. But that doesn't explain how Tennessee did it. It clearly doesn't explain how New Hampshire did it. New Hampshire and Florida both have a slightly higher sales tax than Georgia. Is that a way we'll look? It's not necessarily the first place I want to go, but it's a place that I think some of the committee members may be looking at. We've also taken our tax code and carved it up quite into, somebody said at the last committee meeting, into Swiss cheese. We've done that by giving so many exemptions to special interest that Georgia's sales tax brings in less percentage-wise, so each percent of sales tax brings in less dollars, $1 billion less dollars, than the same percent in Tennessee, and we have 3 million more people than Tennessee. So if we can take a look at not giving special interest tax credits to everyone who can hire a lobbyist at the Capitol, we're going to be able to give that reduction instead to all the folks who can't afford a lobbyist at the Capitol.
I want to ask one last question on this point. I don't mean to linger on it, but you brought up affordability as, in your view, the #1 issue facing Georgia right now. To somebody who may be hearing this conversation and thinking, if the income tax is cut, is my property tax going to go up? Is my sales tax going to go up? Are you prepared right now to promise Georgians that if the income tax is eliminated, other taxes they face will not be increased?
I'm prepared to say that Georgia doesn't charge a property tax right now. The local governments do. We've not charged a property tax in 10 years. As the chair, I will not support any bill that raises property taxes, gas taxes, puts a tax on groceries in Georgia.
How about a sales tax?
A sales tax, I do think there's some consideration in if you're going to say the elimination of sales tax exemptions would be a new sales tax. Remember, right now, we exempt sales tax on lottery tickets. We exempt sales tax on yachts. Why are we doing that? How does that help the average Metro Georgia family afford childcare, groceries, gas? It doesn't.
Sounds like some work still to be done to hammer out this plan.
Oh, there's $20 billion in special interest credits. The $20 billion in special interest credits exceed the amount that we charge in income tax. So you could do a repeal and replace. I don't think that that's necessarily going to be the move. There are some credits that we probably do need to support and keep. But if you're looking for the easy move, that's the easy move. I don't think that this committee is looking for the easiest answer. We're looking for the answer that makes sure we're also funding Georgia's core priorities of education, healthcare, public safety, those items, infrastructure.
We've covered a lot of ground here, Senator. I appreciate your time. We always like to end with this. To somebody who may not know you, may not know your political background and know of your time in the state legislature, your elevator pitch to a potential voter would be what?
I'm a true Georgian, and I'm also a true conservative. Raising 4 boys here, 2 of our own, 2 foster kids. My wife's a physician. I think I've got a good feel of what's going on here in Georgia. I understand rural and urban. And it's not a debate about whether Metro should grow or rural Georgia should grow. The issues that we're appealing to, reducing the state income tax, making sure that the law of the land's applied equally, and making sure that families feel safe in their home are issues that I think apply inside and outside the perimeter.
I think it's a good place to end it. Senator, thank you very much.
Thank you.